Well, my first experience with the class of 2018 was as their 7th grade Latin teacher. We chanted noun declension upon noun declension, and verb tense after verb tense. I wouldn't even guess the number of sentences we parsed and translated together. They departed for greener pastures of Mr. Clausius' classroom for 8th grade Latin, but we met up again in 9th and 10th grade literature, studying first the ancient Greeks and Romans, and then we read great medieval literary masterpieces by luminaries such as Chaucer, Dante, Milton, and Shakespeare. Through all our times together, 2 things became abundantly clear about these students. First, they worked hard. Whether it was in Latin, literature, or history, they applied themselves fully to the task at hand, and I was happy to reward them with the fruits of their hard labor. The second thing that became clear to me, and to any of the other teachers whose classrooms they graced, is that they love food. It was no surprise to me that many of their senior memories involved food. First Thursday of each month, they would all bring in something to share, but between those days, they looked for every test, birthday, whatever, as an excuse to bring in something delicious to share, not only with each other, with their teachers as well. Now, it's an undisputed truth that a happy wife makes for a happy life, and I think right along with that is a happy teacher is a happy grader. Keep that in mind, underclassmen. And so, in celebration, not only of your graduation from Providence, but also in celebration of your love of good food, I would like to talk tonight about feasting. Particularly, I would like to talk about the role that feasting plays in being human, and how it reminds us of several important truths about reality. These truths are at odds with the prevailing wisdom of our age, the sophistry of the calculators who believe that human beings are simple biological machines whose lives ought to be measured against how closely they compare with an assembly line. What do they get done? How quickly did they do it? What was expended to do it? Rather, as Christians, we understand that the measure of a human being is found in one's love for God and love for his neighbor. And the first thing I would like to propose tonight is that feasting is an essential part of being human because it reminds us that we do not live for work's sake, productivity, or usefulness. The perspective that prioritizes efficiency and utility is essentially at odds with the idea of feasting and celebration. The argument made by the calculators and the utilitarians runs along these lines. Things that require more effort, more time, and more resources are inferior to something that requires less effort, less time, and less resources. Since fixing the traditional Thanksgiving dinner requires extra effort, extra time, and extra money than a typical dinner, it ought to be discarded as a waste of time, effort, and resources. The meal pills of George Jetson from the 60s cartoon is the ultimate culmination of utilitarian usefulness. A Thanksgiving meal could be conveniently distilled into a pill the size of a Tylenol, swallowed down in a matter of seconds, while providing all of the necessary nutrition. Surely a Thanksgiving dinner pill would be superior to a traditionally prepared dinner? Yet, as clever as the idea of a food pill may be, it is only clever by half, and misses much of the point about Thanksgiving dinner. We partake of it for its own sake, not for the mere sustenance of our bodies. Feasting is about enjoying the taste of the food in our mouths as we chew it through jerky, roast beef, mashed potatoes, gravy, fresh baked rolls, cake, pie. A feast would not be a feast without the tangible experience of tasting the food, chewing it, and swallowing it. We spend days and hours preparing a Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner that would be consumed in a matter of an hour or two, because we value the thing itself. One doesn't spend hours in the kitchen preparing for a special feast thinking about all the nutritious benefits they will gain. No, they endure the difficulties because there is a very human joy and delight to be found in sitting down together with family and friends, enjoying the fruits of your labors, and joyfully giving thanks for what you have and what you have been spared. Graduates, take time to rest from your labors and delight yourselves in the many blessings of the Lord. Remember that He Himself rested after the 6th day of creation. He rested not to make Himself a better worker, but because all he saw was good. Feasting is also an essential part of being a human being because it reminds us that we do not live for the sake of ourselves. This is a sad feast that has only one partaker. Indeed, it isn't much of a feast at all, is it? Why does Grandma prepare her famous salad? Why does Dad peel and chop the potatoes? Why does Mom form the dough into rolls? For their own enjoyment, yes, but not only that. They do these things for the sake of adding to the delight and pleasure of their beloved family. Feasts remind us that we are not an island in a vast sea, but a continent of humanity. Feasting is a human characteristic shared across all cultures, across space, and across time. We share feasts together for the same reason that God created Eve. It was not good for man to be alone. Even the pagan philosopher Aristotle recognized this truth. Man is a rational creature intended by nature to live in community. To live apart from other men he thought was perhaps to become something more than a man, but I think we know that more likely it means to become something less of a man. This points to an important truth about feasting, namely that it is about more than just eating the same food at the same time in the same place, but it is about sharing ourselves with others. When we gather together to feast, we talk, we remember, and we tell stories. We laugh, we sing songs, and sometimes we cry. We feast with our elders and with babies. And the notion that human culture is a partnership between the living, the dead, and those yet born becomes much more real to us. Feasting reminds us that we, as human beings, were made for community, and that we are sharing more than food for the body. Finally, feasting is an essential part of being human because it reminds us that we exist for the sake of something higher. The religious roots of feasting and festivals is unmistakable. Who else has the authority to separate certain times and places from others but God? Remember these words from Genesis. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, made it set apart. Because on it, God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. God concluded his work of creation by creating a whole day to not work, and called it holy. Elsewhere in Scripture, we see that feasting and rest are continually displayed as being important to God. In the Old Testament, the Lord established a series of feasts for the Hebrews to observe throughout the year, and many of these lasted for a whole week. Could you imagine if Christmas and Thanksgiving feasts lasted a whole week? Easter should last for a week, ladies and gentlemen, not one day. These days served as focal points of remembrance for what the Lord had done for them, be it his deliverance of their forefathers from bondage in Egypt or the pardon of their sins they received on the Day of Atonement. Feasting for the Israelites meant remembering God. Jesus himself, while observing the Passover, instituted his own supper, a feast kept by his followers down to our own day. And the revelation of John, at the end of the Bible, reminds us of the feast yet to come, the marriage supper of the Lamb, celebrating the wedding of Christ to his bride, the church. And I think when we feast together with love for God and our neighbor, we foreshadow this supper in some small way. So Alyssa, Bonnie, Lauren, and Libby, I pray that God will bless you with much rest, much feasting, but above all, hearts that continually find their rest in himself alone. May you go forth from this place with his blessing, and we look forward to the great feast in the new heaven and the new earth, when all who are Christ by faith shall rejoice with him as we feast with him on account of his perfect sacrifice to redeem us from all of our sins.